Yeah, any moment it can go live. Yes,
allegedly.
it is live. Yeah, it is live now. Okay,
yeah. She's
right. Because from that moment, it takes a couple of minutes. Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
The meeting is live.
Yeah, so now it is live. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to 42nd edition of NEET Talks. And we have a special guest, Ms. Parvati Nair from Chennai. And just to give a brief about her, most of you know her, but still I have to do my honors. So she's based in Chennai, and her portfolio varies from painting to video to installations to text and photography to various forms. And then somebody is making some sound, has to mute, please. Okay, yeah, okay, right. And one of the most interesting thing, which I had observed and I saw that many other people also commenting, is that she uses very simple techniques like pencil to come across very complex kind of depictions. And science and technology also comes very prominently in her works. Personally, that is something a very fascinating point for me. And then she has done solos in many parts of the world, including Singapore, Jakarta, and in many other parts of the country. And Parvati Nair has done public installations in many public spaces, including some specific airports in the country, and many collections, including places like Sotheby's Art Institute, Australia India Institute, Deutsche Bank, all have her works as collections. And another point which was interesting in her profile was that, which I also went and personally saw, she did a TEDx talk in Chennai, wherein she was talking about a specific work of her, which is mostly about an ancient instrument which was used for like what we call as an analog computer of that time, called astrolabe. And she just tries to learn history through geography, which is a very different kind of an experience that talk was. You can all see that in YouTube. I think I would stop the intro at that point and leave the stage for her so that she takes us forward through her works. Thank you very much, Parvati Nair, for accepting our request, and stage is set for you. Thank you. You have to unmute. Yeah.
Aren't you going to do an introduction about Nirachartha now, or?
No, you can go ahead. Do it later.
All right. Well, thank you, to Nirachartha for giving me this opportunity to talk about my journey as an artist. It's always nerve-wracking to share, but it's also very important to take these moments in time to share, to look back and, to think about what you've been doing. Sometimes, the magic of making is so much that you're in there all the time and you don't sort of take that step back sometimes to see, what the trajectories have been, what the journeys have been. So, it's, thank you for allowing me to share it with you, but I think sort of reciprocally for an artist to, the process of deciding what to share is a very interesting one. And, I've taken works with this, with a little bit of, works done in Kerala, which I thought would be interesting. But I've also sort of picked and chosen things from a wide arc. This is obviously not the entire body of work. And I think it would be, it would then just be a stop-start slideshow if I tried to do everything. So it's a selection, but I hope it sort of conveys something of what I want to say and do as an artist, and gives some sense of the range of interests or the range of media and materials and ideas that I try to engage with. So let me start off by requesting Satish to let me share screen.
Yeah, you are now.
And in advance, forgive me for technical glitches,
Sure, no problems.
I think my 12-year-old daughter is better at the computer than I am, and I know that she's watching. So, hello, Ananya. Okay. So this is the presentation this evening, and many thanks to all of you who have joined in to make to have made the time to to make this time to come in for this show. So, I've called the show, I've called the talk to see what happens, which I mean it in many iterations of this meaning, because in a sense that, that for me, making art is seeing what happens in the world and translating that onto my picture plane, whatever that may be, whether it's, drawing or photography or installation. And then to also, as Satish said, I do try and try many different mediums. Now, this is not a sense of, oh, I've got to be a new and trendy artist and try new media, but the ability to think of different medias and different kinds of different like a sort of a palette, a thali of food, or a palette of different choices, and to be able to sample them differently, this for this, the medium literally sort of being part of the message. Having said which, drawings are the the construct or the scaffolding upon which I think I build most of my thinking and my thoughts and what I do. And the picture that I've taken is also a series of images of the eye under a microscope. So, the image that I've taken to talk about, to see what happens, is an image of the eye. And I think that, to an extent, for me, art remains important and vital and meaningful when you are able to just sometimes let go and see what happens. I mean, every thing that you try may not be successful. And, I think a good artist's career is littered with mistakes and littered with things that go wrong, because if you're too careful and if you found a formula and then you think, well, everything will, turn up absolutely perfectly in that formula, then, why make the art? So also in this talk, let's see what happens. Let's throw it out there and, see what happens with the art and with this engagement with you this evening. So I've decided to start at, a place where I had gone to London to do my master's, and I had always drawn. Even before I painted, I had drawn. But I think I'd always bought into that hierarchy of you draw things and then you paint them. And, the bravery to show the drawings as artworks of their own, I think really came from that experience of the master's. Not that it taught you technique, but it exposed you to people like, I don't know, Julie Meritou or Paul Noble, who was showing drawings. I mean, their whole exhibition was that of drawings, and drawing was having at that time a kind of resurgence of interest, a resurgence of artists who were sort of coming out there and saying, this is the core of my practice, I draw. I mean, of course, there's William Kentridge, who we've seen in Kochi as well, but the ability to sort of bifurcate your practice to say, I draw, I paint, I make videos, was, I think, I know it sounds so simple now, but for me that was, really kind of an act of faith. And this is sort of where some of my interest starts. This is particles that are so small you can't see them with your naked eye. You can only see them thanks to their interactions with other particles. And these are recorded in cloud chambers and scanning tunneling electron microscopes, in very, very advanced scientific instruments, whether they are images from spacecraft, images from NASA, and which always leads me to say that it is the simplest drawing form that I use, which is drawing. There's no secret technique to it. It's a pencil, it's the, I draw on wood most of the time. And that's all there is. Wood is an unforgiving medium in the sense that mistakes can't be erased. It just makes it smudgy. But that's a certain discipline that's sort of fun and meditative. But if drawing is the oldest art form, certainly our cave ancestors couldn't have drawn these images because these are images of our time. They're thermal images of the sun, or there is, an image of a moon crater sent back by a spacecraft. So in that sense, it is using something very old, but to talk of our time. And I sometimes call my art a philosophy of space because I think I'm constantly dealing with the space in which we live, the environment, water, which you will see is a true theme through many of my works, the spaces in our body, the infinitely tiny spaces that there's a Japanese term called ma, which exists between particles. And to go back to the Greeks, it's space is the greatest thing because it contains everything. And then it also then leads to what is this space? What does it mean that we are in this space? It's a philosophy of living in the world and trying to understand our place in the world. And for me, however kind of idealistic that may sound, for me, that's why I make art. It's an investigation into the space in which we live, and that basic question of why are we here? What are we? Why are we? So I'm sort of, in this drawing trajectory, I will, the dates and the details of this are given in the installation itself. I started with making, as you've seen in the previous ones of the sun and the moon and the particles, extremely small images. In part, I felt that was a reaction to the society of the spectacle. I wanted my work to be very small and intimate. But then I began to realize as I explored this that it was not really small that interested me, but scale, and the very small and the very big and the in-between, and how we reacted as a viewer to these changes in scale. A very intimate work would draw you in. So this installation, Drawing is a Verb, I worked with an architect stroke interior designer who planned the space for me. So nothing was on the walls. We repurposed this space to create a sort of journey for the viewer to go up close, to move further away, to react to the drawings as a continuum, as part of a walk, as part of experiencing the drawings, as opposed to seeing them as something inert on a wall. So the idea of drawing is a verb. And of course, I believe that in drawing, almost more than any other sort of art form, every dot that I make, I do use the pointillistic technique, as you can see. Every dot that I make, every part of my process is visible. There is, I don't hide behind anything. The drawing is a verb, and yes, and then it does become a noun that you go through. So in this particular case, these were images of Europa, where there was a tiny corridor like a shrine. So you sort of had to go up. You physically had to go up to this image, which is on the left side of my screen. And then when you turned around, you saw the exact same thing drawn in a very large space on the opposite side. So, willy-nilly, your body was implicated in the act of being drawn into the work, or then having to stand back and see the work. As I said, a lot of the works were very small scale, and it offered, I think, an opportunity to rethink an art form. This was in Singapore. And I think a lot of the people who came sort of said that, whether they responded or not, they certainly rethought what an installation means, not just, not just an installation of, say, fabric or twigs or new material, but the way of presenting art so that it is experiential and not just visible. So that was Drawing is a Verb. And then, as I said, I then moved to India, where things changed, yet again. And the art is always, it's a truism perhaps to say that the art is a reflection of one's life and one's personality. And as you change, the art changes. And I think we need to be brave enough to do that, to acknowledge that, just as your taste in books or music change, as you change as a person, the art in itself changes. And this was a work that was done at a show, as a group show in Chennai called To Let the World In, curated by Chaitanya Sambrani, which was a very large group show that was also sort of looking at points of art history in in India, so to say. And so those particles that you saw right at the start, which was sort of that big, is here blown up into 3 large panels. And along with this, I made a companion video. So it was sort of starting to realize the same idea in more than one form, not as a tautology, but as companion pieces. So some things that you wanted to say that could be said as a drawing, and other things that you wanted to say about the same subject that then went into a video. The starting point of this was again sort of science, and a long time ago, there was a philosopher, Greek philosopher called Lucretius, who wrote this poem called then I always get the name wrong. Let me just check it again. It's De Rerum Natura, which, these sort of thousands of years ago, he looked at dust in a sunbeam and he said, what moves them? And he then sort of said there were particles. He postulated, he thought, he imagined there were particles so small that you couldn't see it with your native eye that collided, and these collisions became bigger and bigger till the dust moved. And actually, this idea stayed with me, which I will later bring back to the Kochi Biennale work, of how collisions bring knowledge. Knowledge is not this sort of very sort of happy, nice thing that you sort of learn. It's a very dynamic and often a very bloody process that produces new knowledge. So I was talking about that at one level, and I was also talking about the voyage of Marco Polo here and the voyage of science in these two. The seeds of things was the drawing, and the nature of things was the video. So this is just a full screen image of the work. It's again just pencil. It's just pencil on wood, and it continues to be for me a very rich and immediate way of expressing myself. So then we go just another scale larger, and we go more 3-dimensional. And this is the work from the Bombay Airport, Terminal 2, which was, again, an invitation. I think for me, it's very exciting when there is an invitation to respond to geography in some shape or form. So here it was an invitation. I mean, the terminal was being built, but it was also looking at Bombay, which is such an exciting place where, you think of it as a hub where ideas come in, where ideas go out, where people congregate, and it's buzzy, and it's a seed of many ideas. So I had this idea of doing this, thinking of the airport of Bombay as this 3-dimensional seed into which people and ideas come and people and ideas go, which sort of applies both to the airport as a site as well as to Bombay as a city. So this is a detail of the same work, which shows you, that sort of central seed to which these lines come in, surrounded by maps of different kinds. This is the work still, people pondering the installation and then the eventual installation. So the lines are actually the lines left by subatomic particles. So at one level, it's talking about movement, about flight. The piece, by the way, is called The Story of Flight. So it's talking about movement at the most basic level. But, it's also when you look at a magazine, when you're flying, which we don't do much now, but when you're flying and you look at a magazine there and you see these lines of force that come in, showing the number of flights that come into a city and leave a city, I thought there was a real resonance between that and this idea of, the movement of subatomic particles. And surrounding all of that are these maps from different stages of, maritime history of India and Bombay, right down to Google Maps, sort of cradling this sort of seed of ideas, innovation, people. And again, part of this whole process was the actual installation, because this was over 20 foot high and they were in pieces like a jigsaw. So, it was for me also working, on this cherry picker with the workers, and and that whole rapport with them. And none of them, they would all sort of say careful, and come up here and you can do this. And it was just a very interesting and collaborative process of putting this work together, which sort of leads me
It's
to
also graphite. It's also graphite. It's a
sorry.
graphite.
Yes,
It's all
yes,
also.
that was also graphite on wood,
No.
but it was three-dimensional. It was like a three-dimensional jigsaw that had to fit together. So it was actually so big that it wouldn't,
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've
it
seen.
wouldn't fit in my studio. So the first time I actually saw it all together and was hoping it would all fit was in, at the terminal
People,
itself, putting it together there. It took about a week to install. But yeah, and, we had to make these sort of little discoveries on how it would fit. And I had a wonderful team of carpenters who made the blocks for me to specifications. So I'm, actually behind any of this, there's an architect who converts the whole thing into a three-dimensional drawing, and then each piece has to be, cut. And because it's joints, it's a three-dimensional jigsaw that joins at three levels. So they all have to kind of fit seamlessly together in the end. So, there's a lot of unseen help and support that goes into creating something like this. Though in the end, we want it to look sort of seamless and like it was always there, but that's of course the result of a lot of people's help. And, I would always thank, the collaborators who helped me doing this at any stage. So this is Kochi, and it sort of obviously started with an invitation to by Jitish to come and see the site. And though I am from Kerala, and my lineage is that, it was still coming with a different eye and coming and seeing it as an artist and seeing how I would respond to the space. So I think from the start, I was always definite that I would wanted to be in Aspinwall because of its maritime history, because of just that space, and you come there and then you come out and then you look at the sea. And I walked through Aspinwall for days. I mean, that's what I did. And finally, this is the space that I chose. And I just showing you a tiny film of it to say how, I was walking through the space, and it's a set of 5 rooms that sort of comes with, it sort of curls in on itself. And, as I walked through these rooms and then I came out of the room and I looked out and I saw the sea there, it reminded me of walking inside a shell. It sort of reminded me of going deeper into an idea. And I thought, yeah, this is where I want to be. And, we sort of sat there and we looked at the space. And I think, it's interesting to see what a space was and then what a space becomes.
Hello.
That's me sort of, I looked at the windows, I looked at the lights, I looked at the fans, and I said, this is a domestic space, but we need to kind of change it into a different kind of space. And that was also exciting to deal with. And this is the shell that, that the space reminded me of, which is an artifact in a maritime journey, the Nautilus, and also became one of the artworks of the installation. So it was an installation of drawings and sound, which the sound was the sound of the sea, and you had to be actually paying close attention to hear that sound. And I loved it when, people would come back, just 1 or 2 at a time, and they'd say, and they would think, can they hear it from the outside, or are they hearing it from the inside? And, those were just, it's nice to give different discoveries to a viewer if possible. Everyone need not get every point that you're talking about, but it's really exciting when, when they do that response. And this is the work that, Satish was talking about, which is the Astrolabe, mostly a tiny, tiny instrument used by sailors from the West to navigate their way to South, to Asia, and specifically to Kerala. So I took this, you can see the detailing on the side, and, sort of worked into it to create this story of a journey starting from left to right, talking about that in between bit is, so I've intervened into the Astrolabe to create different stories. The script is there, it's sort of Proto-Arabic, but I've deliberately kind of confounded it. So you try to read it, but you can't. And, there is this whole big blood clot on the side, which is, that idea about what the seafarers did, and the encounters between the Westerners and the people in Kerala was not, was a very bloodied one with many wars fought. But at the end of it, knowledge of mathematics and knowledge of the spice trade and knowledge of different peoples was there and exchanged. And this exchange of knowledge certainly left both parties completely different at the end of it. And it goes all the way to the end, where the last panel is, seeing Earth rise from the moon, to sort of suggest that the impulse to travel is very much part of what makes us human. This was another installation in the Biennale, which is of, one of them, the one on the extreme top left-hand corner is actually Aspinwall. So the viewers were actually seeing the space in which they were viewing it from an aerial view of that. And there are also, it was the 6 islands of Kochi depicted in certain ways. And, when I was walking around Kochi, I'd also sort of come across a lane called Totakyat Lane, which is, my Taravado, my family house. So I, showed that in one of these images. So it was very much a question of engagement with this place and space and sight in a very, for me, a very deep and meaningful way. And the 5 rooms, as you can see, allowed you a journey through these rooms to create a little journey, I hope, of your own, where there were artifacts and pointers at different, parts of the journey, and this whole play of scale. I haven't shown all the images, but there were also those really, really tiny images of water based on photographs that I took of the Kochi beach that allowed you to create your own mythology as you walked through these places. Here was mine, but what you saw and what you felt and what you created is as real as the journey that I took. And the last room was, this perhaps one of my favorite works called Salt and Pepper, which is, a large grain of pepper under a microscope hanging over this, this created sea image of Kochi beaches based on photographs that I had taken. And it, talks at different levels about, the travelers who came with their gold to get black gold or pepper back. It talks of, someone looked at it and thought it was a meteorite that was going to, crash into the waves. And it could be that too, because as I said, things change. After these encounters, life changed. So a very simple work at one level. I mean, it really just is salt water and pepper, salt and pepper. But, the ability to read in layers or different histories and different geographies into the work. I'm sort of going to fast forward.
There is a small question for you from Shanti. So she's asking, how do the works stay so clean? Does the graphite not smudge?
You have to be very careful. You do. You really have to be very careful. And, I'm constantly putting pieces of tissue and pieces of paper so that it doesn't smudge. It is sprayed with a fixative, and then it is industrially sprayed with PVC. So it is with, it is coated so that it doesn't smudge. So to sort of come to this work, it's just, as you can see, it was a solo at the Dakshin Chitra Museum in Chennai. And the idea of water, which, constantly finds room and space in my work, this was entirely about a river in Chennai, which most people don't even know exists. most people know the Coam and some of them know the Adyar River, but the Cosus Taliyar, which is the third river of Chennai, is sort of not known or recognized by most. And there was these, we were taken there, some of us, by Niti, who is an environmental activist, to look at, Ennore, the Ennore Creek and the river, and how there were illegal constructions that was sort of, stopping the flow of the river, and it was harming the lives of the fishermen. And it was it was quite an incredible experience to go there. And I just went and I took pictures and I filmed it. And sort of unrelatedly, but later when there was this opportunity, I wanted to show this work. So this show had no drawings; it was photographs and videos. And this idea of being, haunted by waters. So these are images of, there's the ash there, which create these sort of surreal landscapes. So I created these installations of photographs that I had taken. I created videos, and also then this which was the largest photographic installation there, was a work that I went back and I drew water, and then I had these bricks made, which I then placed on the water as a sort of sign of illegal constructions on water, and it was sort of called A River Runs Through It. And it was it was a very satisfying installation because of the working. This was the first and I think perhaps only solo show I've done, entirely just photographs and videos. But it was also a very sort of way of expressing that creativity through a multiplicity of images. And then to carry on with water, there was I was part of an Indo-German group show where the idea was that we were going to create works of public art by the banks of the Coam River to raise awareness about the state of the river, where the river met the sea. But unfortunately, in the end, we didn't get permission from the government to do that. So the project went on, and finally the curators, which was Florian Metzner from Germany and Ravi Agarwal from India, they decided, along with the Goethe Institute, to do a presentation or a show at the Lalit Kala, but it was, they didn't really want us to do, it should not be just that same, whatever we were planning on the beach to be brought in. This was a sort of reaction or response to the fact that the beach installation could not be done. So for the beach installation, I had planned the giant column, which is something I work with, which is, a flow drawing that sort of cuts across, caste and creed. It's, it's outside a fisherman's house, it's outside a bank. It's really a welcome and an invitation. And I was going to do it through realized ceramic pieces of these of diatoms, which are subatomic creatures that are in the water. And, I had I'd even got the ceramic pieces made. So, but I didn't want to do that. What I decided to do was that I would, having had this deep engagement with the Coam River and this engagement with the Cosus Taliyar, I thought I would work with the third river, which was the Adyar River. So when I went to see the Adyar River, it was awash with garbage on both sides of the river. So then I decided I would remake the same column that I was going to make, but with garbage. So I worked with a couple of volunteer groups, and I went with them, a couple of times a week for about a couple of months. And we collected, what you see is the garbage that we collected and classified from the river. There were bottles, and there were slippers, and there were, more dangerous things like, needles. But we collected and we quantified and we parceled out the garbage. And for the eventual installation, which was called the Damned Art Project, I put this up as an installation called Invite Refuse. as in the column invites you in, but it's made out of refuse. So, the double meaning of refuse is garbage. And also this idea of the refusal in our public imagination to see how complicit we are in throwing this garbage onto our streets, onto our rivers, and into polluting the environment. It's, the garbage that was there was in a way thrown by all of Madras. We were all part of the materials that were made, that were used to create this installation. And, I've just shown you some of the, some of the garbage we picked up sort of in between, I said there's a prize for anybody who can find a pair to any of the slippers that we found there, because they were all sort of single slippers floating around, and we never found a pair. Along with this, and on that the boxing glove and the and the toy gun, but it sort of was, there's danger there. There is danger in what I was seeing. So I made this column. I also made a film called By the Mouth of the River, which was documenting the process, but also documenting the lives of fishermen there. And it also then became just a poetic meditation on the garbage, which has interestingly and very nicely for me been picked up by Artport and been shown at different parts of Europe as part of the We Are Ocean Festival. So the film has had a life of its own, but the eventual installation at Lalit Kala, as you can see, had the drawings of, the diatoms and the algae, and that sort of made into three-dimensional form as just the ceramic pieces, just as that homage or nod to what should have been. And then, the large-scale column, which was about 15 feet by 15 feet, as well as the movie. And it sort of was, again, on an inclined bed of sand. And, in response to an earlier question, so, I think a lot of people just thought there was a bed of sand there and we went and kept the bottles in. But I worked with, Madras Terrace Architectural Firm to create a substructure that would support this over the course of the month-long exhibition. So an installation is always a collaborative effort of the scale, which requires a lot of, inner scaffolding and support and ideas on how this, how can that sand not fall off this inclined plane? How do these things stay in shape? We did a trial installation on the, on the terrace of the Goethe Institute, where, I was saying, oh my gosh, I hope this succeeds, So it's sort of that, that idea of, see what happens, take that plunge of faith and see what happens. But then it, like the drawing, it's, there is that process of chance and choice, but there is also deep preparation that goes into it before you can sort of say, well, let's see what happens. This was Invite Refuse at Lalit Kala. And I'm sort of jumping to another trash art installation,
That was,
just because of the obvious links.
That was also symbolic, right? Like column is something which welcomes you to a house. This is something like in every beach and river. This garbage is what is welcoming you now, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's true. And
so did you have problems to select which garbage to use? Sorry, it's a very unfortunate thing to discuss still.
I did, well, I pretty much used everything that I found, but there was vast quantities of styrofoam and sponges. So there was a lot of it which could not be used. So I would tell them, the volunteers, don't collect that for me, collect the pens and the light bulbs and, this sort of thing for me. So, and it was then sort of disposed of safely, first by Goethe, and in this case, later by the Allianz. They're all sort of, well, okay, so the Allianz one. So this was the next trash art installation that I did. I felt that in the case of the river, in the case of Invite Refuse, it was very much chance. Whatever had been sort of thrown up there on the river, I used. But I thought it might be interesting to invite people to give me their household garbage. So there was, the media had this newspaper articles and telling everyone that this artist wants your trash. And I had people actually calling me saying, really? And they said, this artist wants your blue and white trash. So somebody called up and said, as usual, media is sensationalizing this. And I said, actually, no, they're not. I really do want your trash. And there were these two bins that were set up at the Allianz, where people for a couple of months, and people were invited to come and drop off their white garbage and their blue garbage. So there was that little idea of talking about segregation, but also this was only going to be made out of garbage that we use in our home. The kind of stuff that we use daily and throw away. I should say at the outset that I have found no answers on how you can deal with it. It's questions that have only raised more questions with no clear answer of how we can put an end to it. But I sometimes feel that the pollution of our rivers and the pollution of our cities, it's in a way because there isn't that ownership, and it is not there in the public imagination. These problems haven't entered the imagination of the people. And I think once they do, and once they start claiming ownership and feeling ownership for it, that's when change happens. It's a question some of you may be thinking, and it's a question that I myself have thought about, as in the purpose of art. I don't pretend to be an activist, but art has inherent activism, poetry has inherent activism in it. I can only talk about the things that I talk about and hope that it finds answers and it finds resonances in people's mind. It's showing where we are in our lives and in our cities and in our world at this time. The Shakespeare's mirror to society kind of thing. But then I don't think there is a duty or an obligation of an artist to provide answers. We provide questions, and if we can provide answers, fantastic. But otherwise, we raise questions and I hope activate the imagination in certain ways. So this was, the garbage. And then, as you can imagine, there was an enormous amount of sorting out of the garbage to do. And again, student volunteers and people sort of sitting and putting all the straws on one side and all the bottles and all the, the Harpic bottles on one side. And again, truthfully, though I had a structure, and though I knew that the end result was going to be a recreation of the Great Wave of Hokusai, it was an homage to an Asian master. It's a woodcut that all of us know. If you look at your hand phones, it's the only artwork yet that has an emoji dedicated to it. And the Great Wave was this woodcut that influenced, Japanese woodcuts, of course, influenced Western art, and it continues to be, something of aesthetic beauty. But it also, to me, was a terrifying wave. It was, Chennai has certainly experienced the tsunami in some level, but it was also the idea of drowning in a wave of trash. So this was the form, and that's why I wanted blue and white trash. But I genuinely, again, didn't know how this was going to take shape. And there was, Allianz was very supportive, Gallery Veda was supportive. It was eventually going to be a standalone installation that would then also be shown at the Allianz, but was part of a solo that was being curated by Lena Vincent. And, she was also sort of very supportive of this process as we went along, where I said, I'm really not sure what I'm going to do, but here's the garbage and here's the wave, and somehow it's going to come together. So, this is sort of showing you the endless Harpic bottles, the telephone, the things that were given to me. I mean, again, there I really used everything that was given. Everything that was given to me was used, unless it didn't match the color scheme. So there was, telephones and clocks, and again, guns and toys, and endless bottles of Comfort and Harpic. It was really, you could do a study of what it is we use in our homes every day. And that was the eventual wave that was created with, again, three-dimensional. It was about 15 feet wide and proportionately tall. And there was also sort of, again, sound was there, and there was sand. And I will sort of show you the small video of what the wave looked like. So when you were there, you would hear the sound of the sea. And that was the great wave that was being referenced. So I just thought I would sort of talk a little bit about the solo show. That the wave was a freestanding thing, but still part of the solo show, where it was called Atlas of Reimaginings, curated by Lena. And the powerful thread through it was water in various forms: water in the home, water on the street, water in all its poetry. And I think the interesting part about a solo show is the ability like this to, curate the space so that, again, it's a very specific and personal journey. And as you go through it, you are able to play with scale and size and color. You will find that there are sort of spots of color that start coming into this, and you can control sound. There was another film that I did for this called A River, where, Ramanujan's poem, A River, I recreated by finding every word of that poem on the streets of Chennai. So each word of the poem is a photograph taken on the Chennai streets, put together as a video. So, there were multiple strands of water running through this, and this became called the altar to water, this particular room, for whatever reason. There was these intricate drawings of water. Now here, if you look, it's an image of a woman with an umbrella behind these rivulets of water. So as I keep saying, if you pay attention, you'll discover more things in the work. It's again graphite on wood, just graphite, nothing else. The rivers of India, which are so polluted, but then when you see them from the top, from Google views, these are Ganga, Brahmaputra in the scene from the top. And as I told you, water rainbow, which was, it did come from a series of images that I took of, in Chennai, we buy water. We have floods, but we also have water, shortage. And it's such a ubiquitous site that it almost sort of sometimes goes without noticing that there are, that we are buying water lorries in our house, in our apartments. And we are, when you go out, there are these water lorries that come, and these women with these huge multicolored buckets come to collect the water. One day I want to do an installation with those buckets, but at the moment, this is pencil and mixed media, and they're very, very small, as you can see. That the scale has come back really, really, really tiny, and there was just a small explosion of color in this solo show, Atlas of Reimaginings. I've only shown 3 here, but it was a set of 5 drawings.
There's a question for you from Deepa Gopal. She's asking, how long did it take you to put together a river of A.K. Ramanujan?
It was several months. I had a friend of mine who was in Chennai as well. Again, it was not, it was a project that I was doing that was finally realized for Atlas of Reimaginings. But, the poem is about a river in Spate in Madurai, and how it, when it is in flood, it carries away this woman and these cows. And it was very interesting for me that in the poem, the woman is carrying, twins, but the twins are not named, but the cows that are carried away and die are named. It's just, it had all kinds of little levels of meaning, the poem. But when it was also dry, it still sort of was injurious to the people living. So though it was about Madurai, I felt it referenced Chennai as powerfully. So it was several months of, walking around, I would say about 4 or 5 months, but it was almost a separate project that found a perfect home in this exhibition. So we would go, and then it became quite a task for us, saying, where are we now going to find this word? And, we did go into malls and into shops and into rivers, and, there was a word Brinda. So we said, now where do we sort of find this? Let's look up the, directory and see if there's somebody's home that we can go and take a picture of. But it also made me sort of actually physically walk to lots of parts. I was actually mapping the river in the city of Chennai in a sense. So it was performative in that way, but of course that was my a performance that's not sort of marked. But I think if you look at the the video and you then know where this comes from, then you kind of see it as a kind of mapping of Madras as well. And of course, no exhibition is complete without an audience. So I just loved the dog sniffing so suspiciously at my drawing, so I had to take a picture of that. But more seriously, there were a lot of students who came through the show, and their responses to the work was really, really quite wonderful and amazing. And I took all of them, we had about 300, 400 students who came, and it was just the most exciting thing. And I'm going to, this was a work called The Arrow of Time, which also, had this little digital part to it that if you, if you sort of held up your device to it, the drawing would come alive as an animation. And I just had this really lovely video of the student that was sort of taking it, who sort of kept doing it. And then I said, you're doing it a lot of times, and this is what she said. I just thought it was great. Yeah, she keeps it so satisfying. And I thought, oh, I'm glad that the drawings are speaking in yet another way. Yes, through the digital medium, but then it did make them relook the drawings, which for me was sort of exciting. And and then they talked about what the drawing could mean, what the ripples could mean, about waves of particles being a point and a wave, and to sort of see it again come alive in a different medium was very exciting. So I've used that to then just show you this sort of though the digital is not not really where I thought I would be most present, it is something that has crept into the work as a response to the time. And this was it was just a purely digital installation at the Singapore Repertory Theatre, where I had the opportunity of sort of mapping with their technical, they were technically so advanced, of mapping the spaces in their theatre with and showing sort of in these huge, large scale to show the work and to map the work, which was it was really quite exciting. But again, it was exciting also because it was in a physical space to do that. Which takes me then to a very physical installation of drawings in France.
Prajakta was asking with what material you bind it.
Bind what?
I hope Prajakta meant the previous installation, I hope.
No, it was just digital. It was digital on screens and mapped on the walls of the theater, of their foyer, and so on. The drawings themselves are with a regular fixative, and then with it's coated with peel. That's an industrial coating. So this was a work. I mean,
sorry, she was asking about the garbage.
The garbage, that was with a variety of ways. We used glue, we stitched it, it was a major, the second one or the first one? Both were slightly different. The first one being a column was, it was on the ground. So they, the chances of it falling over were not there. They were, wedged together. So, there wasn't, the question of gravity did not come in there. But in the other trash installation, for sure, we had to tie them, we stitched them, we pushed them, we did all kinds of things to keep it there. But it was not a permanent installation. If it was a permanent installation, we would have thought of some other device. But we always knew that this was going to be deinstalled and taken to the Alliance and then If you found the money, we were going to take it somewhere else, but we didn't find the money to do it. So, and how am I doing for time? Okay. And I'm also part of an art collective called the Hashtag Collective, which we come together not often, but at certain times to do an installation together, or sometimes just to brainstorm and think of ideas. And, so we have both some realized work and, many unrealized thoughts and ideas. And it's just a way of, art is, it's a solitary process. I write and I draw, and both of them are extremely solitary processes. So I love the idea of collaboration. I really love collaborating, and I think it's such a way forward in the art world, both in terms of harnessing the expertises of different people, as well as to create that idea, that whole place where you bounce ideas off each other. And I really love collaborating. And this is, we are two painters and two architects who have come together as the Hashtag Collective. And this was the work we did in 2016-17 in Kochi. It was an outdoor installation, again 15 feet square, which was called Reflecting on the Inhabited Crossroads, which was looking at Kochi as a place of change, as a paradigm of change. And so the glass panels, which could be rotated, was sort of reflecting aspects of Kerala into it. And it was based on the Nalaketta device, and then also then referencing the Kochi Biennale as a paradigm changing event on the shores of Kochi. It sort of was, so once you entered it, because of these 3 rows of mirrors and mirrors that moved, you decided where you went in and how you shaped the mirrors and what your journey was. And it was, again, really interesting. Of course, it was a great place for people to take selfies, but also when you talked to people, there were also these very interesting things that came back to us about when you see this multiple fragmented sense of self. For a lot of people, it was very sort of psychologically disturbing to see oneself sort of splintered, and how do you bring this together again? And of course, then there was a child that would just run through it saying, "Wee, this is great fun." So, it was very much an interactive installation. And depending on, how you opened or closed it, you left your mark on the installation. And, it could even, because sometimes the way the mirrors were, the entire installation could sometimes disappear if the mirrors were all opened at a certain way. So it was really an interesting intervention into public space to create a range of experiences for the viewers who came there. And while in Kerala, I also want to talk about another work that was part of a collateral show, which, where I took, it was after the floods, and it was, like people like Kudumba Shri, who were doing so much for, in the women of Kerala, who was doing so much for the flood relief. And I was wanting to do some kind of commentary on that. And then I came across there's so many forms of Theyyam, but there's just one, which is Devakuta, which is done by women. So I sort of worked on that idea, and I created this set of 6 huge panels, which talks about the floods and the waters rising, and the suggestion that perhaps more feminine energies could unshackle us, more feminine energies could maybe offer some sort of solutions to these to the problems that we are having with man and nature, kind of confronting each other. And there are, so it's a layered work. So, the back of the Devakuta performer is also from, Marguerite's Vanishing Man. So here it's sort of a vanishing woman, it's a vanishing performer. The central cloths of the Devakuta, that there's a lovely story about that, in the sense of, I thought, so, it's like a maze, and when you reach the center of the maze, what's the great discovery that you'll have? And I was talking to Leela Sampson, the dancer, and she sent me this verse, which I have, copied out and not pasted hers, but I've recreated there, which says at the center is Akasha. There is emptiness. That's what is at the center of things. And I, again, for this video, for this work, it was installed with the companion video, as you saw, which was talked about, which was a kind of recreation of this journey of the Apsara, which is the story of Devakuta, who comes down to the gardens and then loses her way and then finds her way back. And so there are things lost and things that are found. And I won't show the whole thing, but I'll just do a little clip of it, which had the kind of Payam music and, the sort of the garden. And Vidushi Sangeeta Shiv Kumar, she sort of, sang the Alapana in the same raga as the Devakuta song to go with it. So just a small bit of it. So, I mean, just to sort of, the idea that you were seeing the panels, but you were also hearing and, a deeper understanding of where the stories came from and what Lost and Found could mean in multiple contexts. So, I mean, I think I'm doing okay for time. So I just wanted to say that I enjoy videos as, as a form of expression of, it's like moving pictures. It's I know that, there are times when I'm very suspicious of video art, and it's that thing that's so hard to define. What is it? It's not narrative. It's not documentary. It's, what is it? But it's, for me, when it's an extension of an idea, when it's an extension of a drawing or a painting, for me, it's an exciting way of bringing time and space, that thing which I really like, into the work. So this was a trilogy of videos that I did called Of Time and Space, where it was really interesting. The camera work was done by a visiting photographer from Singapore for this one. The other ones I did the camera myself. I filmed it myself. And the sound for it was done by an artist friend of mine from London. So there was sort of three of us coming together in a way to kind of make the image. So there were three videos which were talking about time and space and sort of fairly, sort of doomsday scenarios. And I'll just show you again a fragment of one of them. Each of them had a slight color, the colors of light. And so this is a compass, and the compass has been placed on my work. And it's that navigation, that circularity of things moving around. It was a trilogy of videos. And now just talk just a little bit about the work that, some of the work that I've been doing during the lockdown. And at any stage of, I'm overrunning time, just let me know and we can sort of stop it there. But again, it was a video that, I was able to shoot a video about, water exchanges. 3 parts of it, which were shown at this digital media art festival. So, it was quite interesting wearing our masks. And it was actually a script that I had written a while back, but it seemed, again, the perfect time to do it, where I contrasted, in a sense, the the discontent within a building such as ours, where we have to buy water, and the water wars that are created within the inhabitants, with the larger public regulations that are there about water, and the sense that the personal is really the political. And if you're talking about a water war happening, well, it's actually happening if you just look around and see what's going on around us. So that was a very kind of satisfying set of videos. And I'm also going to go back to, there was also a very nice poetry project that I was involved in with photo poetry, where, the poetry that I wrote and images were shown on an online platform by the Goethe Institute called Held. And I just sort of was very quickly going to sort of show you how, right from the start, the things that I've written have occasionally, the poetry that I've written has occasionally found expression in the art as part of the installation. Here it was on the walls. And then later in another solo of mine called The Ambiguity of Landscapes, it took the form of a sort of sculptural book of poetry, which had, photographs and poetry that came together. That's one of the pages of the book. And it was a long poem, and that poem was also printed as a book, and extracts from it was taken into the poem being given a sculptural form, so to say. And then there was Held, which happened last year, which sort of really chronicled the process of being in the lockdown. It really started with, just one day we were free and the next day we were locked in, and I was sort of hovering near my windows. I wasn't going out at all. And sort of this feeling of bewilderment of saying, I don't even really understand what's happening. And then as I looked out of the windows, I kept looking, and then I started taking pictures with no purpose, so to say, really with no purpose. And then I sort of looked at the empty playground where my daughter would play, but there was nobody playing there at the moment. And to me, it seemed like the seesaw was like a sundial that was sort of marking time. And time was being marked in a very different way at this time. And so I started taking images out of each of the 5 rooms in my apartment on the 8th floor. And then sort of to these photographs, then words began to come and attach themselves to the photographs. And it became a poem called 5 Rooms, each of them a meditation on what I saw from the different rooms. And then with a couple, with 3 other poets, Goethe Institute presented it as Held. I took this poem to a close friend of mine called K. Srilata, who's an amazing poet. I mean, she's really amazing. And, she brought in 2 others. And so I presented my work as photo poetry, which is a form that really interests me. It sort of comes from the surreal times, the idea of, images and words colliding and then creating something else. And the interesting part of it was that we did it as several uploads. It wasn't one upload, there were 4 uploads. So as our experience of the lockdown changed, the poems changed and reflected that. So it was a very intense engagement from within the 4 walls of our house. One of the other sets of poems was me inviting people to send me the new stories that influenced them or affected them in the lockdown, which I then wrote about and also drew. So I did these drawings again of these news stories, of the child who, was dragged across, the image that went viral, the child was dragged across to his home. And the one next to it is of the Coimbatore market in Chennai, which is bustling and full of life. But within the, lockdown, it was also considered to be one of the places where a lot of the COVID started in Chennai, and then it was shut down. And I don't think in our lifetime we ever thought we would see Coimbatore in this empty way. So there were 7 poems like that, and the migrants, as well as other stories which affected people. And it was based on, 7 people's sending me 7 news stories. So that was one of the photo poems that I uploaded. And it was realized as sort of drawings and images based on that. And, just to sort of conclude, to say that I'm sort of currently working on a sort of autobiographical project based on experiences of my father. It's been going on since 2019 and was supposed to have had a physical expression as an installation and video and a performance last year. But of course, with the lockdown, that hasn't happened. But, I continue to sort of create artwork for it with my niece, Nayantara. She's a very, very talented writer and scriptwriter. And so it's, something that's sort of ongoing in the lockdown times. And I will just sort of finish with perhaps switching on the light. Sorry about that. And to sort of, use from literature this, the book, The Goldfinch, which really talks about art. And to sort of say that, as I've sort of grown older and as I've grown and developed as a person and an artist, and, why we create art and what it means are questions that have had different answers. And I really sort of subscribe to this, that, an artwork works not, even the Mona Lisa may or may not work, not because it's sort of, all mankind sort of, it speaks to it. It speaks to you. When a work of art works, it's, as she says, it's not the reason, you don't say, I love this painting because it speaks to all mankind. The reason you love a piece of art is because it's that secret whisper from the alleyway. You say, you, hey kid, you, I, the painting, or I, the work of art, or I, the installation, I'm talking to you. And do you hear me? Do you respond? And when you do, then something magical happens. So whether it's the single person or the group of people, it's that connection that we're looking for from a work of art. And I think sometimes we forget it, when there's all these issues of style and fashion and market and what sells and what is acceptable and what is trendy and what's not trendy. I think sometimes you forget that there is that still that core, that's something there which is a hook or a nail that snags you, that snags you and says something to you, something that makes you see the world just a little differently. And that's why I think that's why it's continuing to be urgent to make art and to continue to have art and to respond to art, and why it's a meaningful part of our lives, not an elite preoccupation, not something that is just done to talk to our peers, though we do want to talk to our peers and we do want to be bought. All those things are important, but there is a core of that, something that speaks, that makes you see, you say, let's see what happens when I let that artwork into my mind and my heart. And, and you also realize that in the end, while it is, we need the support. As an artist, trust me, we need support. We need people to appreciate the art, to see the art, to think about the art, to buy the art, but at the end of it, sometimes on a good day, success is a worn down pencil, that's, when you look at that worn down pencil and you say, yeah, that was a good day. And you think, well, in the end, that on a good day, that's success. So thank you for your time and your patience, and thank you for sort of letting me just see where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Parul. It was nice. So nice. Also the end note, which I really felt very meaningful, the worn down pencil. Yeah.
Sometimes it's worn down us also, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So open to questions, comments, suggestions.
Your mic.
I'm muted. Without taking too much of your time, shall I say a few words?
Sure.
Yeah. Is it okay to call you by your first name, Parvati?
Yes, please.
Yeah. It was a beautiful presentation. You're very articulate and inspiring. You spoke from your heart with conviction. I loved your work. Very transparent and very what to say. It, it's black and white, and I like black and white. So that was very good. And I'm a wannabe artist. I have some skills, but I've not found my voice. And you have created your own signature style, which I liked. And the carry home message for me, which I took, is you said, take the plunge of faith and see where it takes you.
Yeah.
So that's the message I've taken, and let me see whether I can put something on canvas which is mine and not copied from other people's work. So it was very inspiring. Thank you. And you're beautiful inside out.
Thank you. No, I mean, first of all, I mean, I don't mean this in any patronizing way, but don't even think of yourself as a wannabe artist. I mean, you know, like Joseph Beuys said, everyone is an artist. So, but it's a question of finding a voice that you feel is yours and that genuinely says what you want to say.
Yeah.
So
loved your work, and it was a very good session. You're articulate and you spoke well. You connected with us.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank
you. Thank you, Parvati. And I have a question, which is your early works are more ambiguous than the recent one, which I felt, because in the end, not also you are pushing that as a as a possibility of an artist. Like we ask questions, rather giving answer to certain things. Like it's not, the question should be very relevant and sincere. So that is more in a way, like I found in our early works as more ambiguous spaces than the later one, because later you are making it a little more, like I don't know what is called that. It's not clear. It is more evident, like you are showing something. This is what I wanted to say. How this you are looking at this transition, and also how do you see adding video into drawing? Like, because it's do you see any sort of inferiority when you do in a particular medium like drawing? Like you need to, or it's kind of an extension you feel like to add.
That's really interesting what you said about spaces, and I think I would like to go back and look at my works. But you're right, there are sort of certain a lot of the newer work, not all, but a lot of it, there are more specific spaces, specific geographies being delineated, and that's that's interesting. I would, I think you've given me something to think about, really, to go back and look at it. While I do think and read a lot, and I, like I said, this current project, which is called Limits of Change, it's been 3 years in the making, and it's still going on. I think I don't consciously set out to do something. I sort of, it's heavily planned, but it's also what that subject or what the research or what it uncovers. I let it go with the flow, which is, I guess, both. That's why I realized that in the sort of in an artscape where people find it easier to pigeonhole you as an artist that would do this and this. When you do this and that, it does create a certain number of difficulties, I suppose. But I like that ability to experiment. In terms of a hierarchy of medium, no, I think what each does is different. I feel that there is there's no such thing as, sort of saying, oh, but that's just decorative art, or that's just art that you put on the walls. I think some of the most exciting art of our times is still, our drawings and watercolors. Your watercolors are brilliant. Watercolors and drawings and, the so-called old media. But I think I find it exciting to experiment with other media that is available to me. So what I try and say with a companion video to a drawing, or a video in of itself, is something that I feel I will not be able to say that same thing in drawing. So if I want to speak about space in a drawing, I would speak about it in a different way. But if I want to talk about it in a video, I could talk about it in a different way. And I really like these sort of companion pieces where you can have, like the really vividly colored Lost and Found, which for me was also quite, I didn't start off by intending to create anything quite so colorful, but, looking at the Devakuta form, and, it became the work that it became. And then I thought, the Devakuta song was so wonderful. And I thought, I would, the percussion and the drum beats, and I thought, what is the raga there? Can that raga be just pulled out as just notes? If somebody is watching this, I mean, it's a bit too literal if you give them the exact Devakuta, but if they hear something, will that activate their senses in a different way? So, sorry, that's a long answer, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it's not either or, it's this and this, or sometimes this can only be said through this. Sort of.
Yeah, I'm adding to it. Like as an artist, it's not always a linear journey. Like maybe sometimes you start, you end up in the same point. Like back and forth. So I just want to know, that's it. Like not like to, you just gone away from that, because it's not linear. Like, sometimes you come to the same point, like to again and again. So.
But when you come back to the same point, something may have shifted, so you come back to the same point. And, I mean, there are usually a collection of ideas and thoughts and images that you work with pretty much all through your life. But when you come back to it, something would have shifted and you're saying that idea in a different way. So
it's spiral actually. It's not even a circle. It's spiral.
It's a spiral. Like the Nautilus shell, you sort of go into it in a different way, I think.
Spiral jetty.
Spiral jetty, yes.
Hi, Parvati.
Hello.
Hi. I have an observation and a question. I'm not sure exactly how to formulate it, so bear with me. Like, your work starts with that collision of subatomic particles, the dust, and you talked about, subatomic particles, and you bring out collision a lot in your work. And then it moves, so it's kind of like scientific, impersonal, and then it moves towards more, the water carriers, like comes into water, and it's about water. Every time water is a repeated theme. Is it because the projects that happened later on were related to water, or in some way, like water kind of, predominates your thinking process or what you're reading? It's like from impersonal, now it's become even more personal to the last, like 2020, where you are, you photographed your daughter's playground. And there also there is a compass. The way the seesaw moves is like the movement of the compass. So is there some? So the first thing is, how did this movement happen, if at all consciously? Second is there maritime influence in your history, personal history?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last question. Is the maritime?
Is there a maritime? Was somebody from your family, or is there something in your personal history or your personal interest?
No, that isn't. No, there isn't any kind of. My father was in the army, and sort of the autobiographical project we're working on relates to that. But I think water has always fascinated me, as in something that sort of life-giving, something you take for granted and then it isn't. And it's been, and I guess when you come and well, when I lived in Singapore, it was like before Chennai I lived there, and it was like living on an island, and you couldn't but be aware of water. When I came back to Chennai, it also became, as you become more environmentally conscious, you suddenly are being aware of these things, like, the water that you drink, the water that you buy, disease, the environment being kind of uh, chipped away at, with rivers polluted, rivers being built over, and then you have the flood in Chennai, and you sort of initially you think nature, but then of course you educate yourself and realize that we are responsible for covering over Poromboka with buildings. So it's like one of the artworks that I showed. It's like a river runs through it. It's something that I respond to, both, I suppose, as a citizen of this place, but also also sort of poetically. I mean, there's something very mystical and marvelous and philosophical about water. I respond to it in multiple ways, and I think it therefore finds multiple forms of expression in the work. The the movement from personal to impersonal is again something I'd have to think about, because yes, one does mind oneself and one's surroundings and one's interests, but for me the scientific is also very personal, which I think is not something that maybe always people respond to, because I think you know the scientific language or a scientific way of looking at the world is an important language, which I believe in, that you know uh, that it's something that we need to think more about, that we need to bring science into our life, not as this sort of textbook thing, but as another way of thinking about the world. So I find it deeply, I'm wonderstruck actually when I read about, admittedly, my entry into science is through literature. I'm not a scientist, and I think maths was well left behind in school. But I'm filled with wonderment that several layers below this is another way of describing the world. And though it might seem abstract and sort of subliminal spaces, or spaces hovering at that liminal point, it is still a form of reality. It is still reality. It is reality as we don't see it, but reality as exists around the world. So um, for me, in a way, so I guess I'm always answering in very long-winded ways, but I think what I'm also trying to say is that for me, the science was always very personal. I felt deeply engaged with it as a subject. I found it fascinating. I read all these pop science books from Stephen Hawking to Schrodinger's cats and kittens, and I just thought that's an incredible way of talking about the world, and we need a little more about it to create some balance. And you know, so the scientific ways and worlds, yeah, I know people still would look at it and think it's impersonal and think it is abstract, and maybe it's a harder connection to make with the black and whites. But for me, it was still very kind of exciting and personal. Though,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, no, obviously. I mean, I get it. Like, it comes through, and your works are very sophisticatedly executed. They're really, like, beautiful, distinctively.
No, thank you. No, but I do, like Sujit's point and your point. I mean, I think these are the reasons I think we do these talks, because we get things that we go away and think about and think, I tend to be very much an instinctive artist, even though, as I said, I read, I plan, I do all of that. I just go with where my instinct takes me. But like this, to sit back sometimes and say, well, you know, what is the arc of this trajectory? And even if it's not unconscious, but how consciously can you intervene into your own arc and examine what you're doing, is it's a big takeaway for me too, really. So thank you. I mean, yeah, thank you for your attentiveness and bringing these
No,
things
it was
up.
fascinating. It was really lovely.
Any other questions or points?
Hi,
Anyone else?
Parvati. Hi, Sugeshan here. Yeah, I've seen your almost some of the work I have seen that that especially the recent work, like when you're talking about the Ramanujan, that theory about that, and especially Chennai, the city like Chennai, it is also really connected to your work. I can see that, and I can see the changes in your work, especially the figurative kind of composition coming, like the latest one related to the lockdown, how migrant workers are moving. I think it. I felt that these works are quite another kind of change of your work. Kind of inspiration from a certain kind of city. How water is also one of the major scarcity problem in our country. So I felt that that was really connected to my thought also in a way, and also I felt it that the starting work, like the circle kind of that work, and it's changed into another level, these things. So I felt that it's a really wonderful presentation and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any other points? In the meantime, just one observation, like when you look at zoom in and see the subatomic particles, and also when you look at from a flight, how does the plane reverse look? The composition looks almost the same. Like is it like a message something by telling whether you look from microscope or telescope, the world is the same in abstract, or it comes inherently?
No, it's true. No, when you break down, the very big and the very small, it's, like those iterations, the very small and the very big are very much the same. And, I like the circle very often because it's, it references the eye lens, it references the telescope, the microscope, the camera. So I do like that circularity and the sense of the interconnectedness of things, as you point out that, the way a galaxy looks and the way an algae looks under the water, there are so many resonances with it, and I like that breaking up of hierarchies and that teasing out of saying you think you know what you're looking at, but do you really, sort of thing. Yeah, I think
Thank you.
That's true.
So there are some messages in the chat. Are you able to see the chat?
I'll thank you. Oh, I have to
Mostly compliments, so that's why like I'm not reading
Yeah.
out.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so anyone else, anything else, or can we wind up with that?
I think, yeah.
Okay, right. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone who attended this talk, and thank you, Ms. Parvati Nair, for your wonderful presentation. Very clear, crisp. Okay. Sujit, will close?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah, just to say
Okay.
thank you again to Nirachartu for doing this and for inviting me and for all the technical hand-holding that you've done. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
very
Parvati,
much.
thank you, Parvati, and thank you all for coming and accepting our.
See you all next week. Yeah.